And hello YouTube, this is Thomas Judge back once again, and I've just watched the penultimate movie of my MCU run through. I've just watched film 21 out of 22, and this was Captain Marvel. Um, this was a good movie. I really enjoyed it. I'm just going to run through what I liked about it, and then I am going to have to dive into a few things that I didn't like, which is more of a kind of a meta thing rather than anything else. But yeah, I'll just jump straight into it. This movie was solid. It was good. It was enjoyable. What did I like about it? The casting of the Supreme Intelligence, and in fact Annette Bening as a Supreme Intelligence, was a really, really good, really clever move. If you're not familiar with the Supreme Intelligence from Marvel Comics, it's essentially a giant green head in a jar. I kid you not. And I was really skeptical about how they were going to do it in this movie, and they did it really, really well. In fact, I suspect that working out the best way to do it is probably one of the impediments for making a Captain Marvel or a Kree-related movie. So, massive props for them doing it. Obviously, you would have seen the movie. It's sort of set on Earth. It's set in 1995. The autopsy of the Skrull has to be the worst bacterial control and alien autopsy protocols I've ever seen outside something like Alien Covenant. Like, it is absolutely just it's almost funny how stupid it is, in terms of people just wandering around just handling like dead alien bodies and not worrying about bacteria or whatever. Having said that, in terms of the Skrulls, I loved the Skrulls. I loved the casting, which I'll get onto later. I love the depiction of them, and I really like the twist of the Skrulls actually basically being the good guys or being refugees, which is quite different to how they are in the comics. If you're not familiar with the comics, the Kree and the Skrull are two very antagonistic, warlike species with their own empires. Neither of them is the good guy. And so this kind of twist here, even for me as a long-time Marvel fan, I found it really interesting. And it was great, and it was really heartwarming to see the Skrull depicted as refugees, as survivors, to see that Telos get together with his family on the ship towards the end. Speaking of the end sequence, one slightly jarring thing, I do remember the reasonably iconic soundtrack for this movie, because I grew up in the 90s. I remember all the songs that are in this movie as being 90s songs and enjoying them. They play I'm Just a Girl by No Doubt during one of the final fight scenes between Captain Marvel and the various of the Kree soldiers. I've got no problem with that. I know some people said it was a bit too on the nose, a bit too feminist. I've got absolutely no problem with that. What I do have a problem with is that they just started playing it, and then the first person she punches falls into a jukebox whilst the song's already playing. And I just thought, wouldn't it have been better if they did something a little bit like Guardians of the Galaxy, where in Guardians of the Galaxy 2 at least, there's a couple of scenes where they're like, right, we're going to get some music on and we're going to plug it in and switch it on. And it kind of explains and accommodates for that as the background music. Like, they could have quite easily just had her kick someone into the jukebox and then the music start playing, but they didn't do that. They just had the music just kick in arbitrarily as background music. It's a minor thing, but watching this I was just like, that was just sloppy. They could have tightened that up. Having said that, the ending was really solid and really fun. I love the fact that she goes Super Saiyan at the end and just starts tearing through spaceships and stuff. And I know I've said before that sort of an escalation of people's superpowers has to be done in like a gradual, careful way. But I think here it works really well. And the reason I think it works really well here is because what we have to keep in mind is that Captain Marvel is not an origin story. I know that everyone kept on saying it was an origin story, but it really isn't. It's a reverse origin story. Because if you look at something like the Hulk, or if you look at something like Iron Man or Captain America, they're all people that are weak and weedy or lack agency over their own lives or have some sort of problem which they need to exercise control over. Either way, what happens is that they then encounter some kind of adversity, and to overcome that adversity they have to elevate themselves to do so. And in doing so they develop superpowers, etc, etc. Sorry, I'm hoping I'm not getting too academic, but that's essentially what an origin story is. However, here that's not the case. The film starts when she has superpowers. She has superpowers and she is a soldier, and the majority of the movie is her trying to backtrack and understand where she got superpowers from and whether she in fact was someone who was vulnerable and human and fallible at the start. So it's a reverse origin story, and in that sense the fact that she can then escalate up to the Super Saiyan thing actually kind of, it works okay. I think that's one of the reasons, narrative wise and structurally wise, it works really well. Similarly, the final battle with Jude Law, where he's like, yeah, let's have a fight and you can prove yourself, and she just knocks him out with one shot. I thought that was really good. It was exactly what was needed, actually, because had that launched into another fight and another hand-to-hand battle and she tried to prove herself without using her powers or whatever, it would have been an unnecessary fight scene that would have dragged out that narrative tempo of the third and climatic finale for the movie. So I think they made a very, very good choice there. I know, again, some people didn't like that, but, you know, I thought that was great. So overall, beat by beat, this film works. It was well constructed. The narrative was good. The pacing was good. I completely see and I totally enjoyed the fact that this was between Infinity War and Endgame, because after Infinity War, like I said in my last review of Ant-Man and the Wasp, after Infinity War, you're on such a nadir, you're on such a sort of a low point with this franchise that just continuing straight into Endgame would have been emotionally just far too draining. And I think what they've done is very cleverly bring it back to like a much lighter hearted, much more sort of standard palate cleanser, which is kind of psychologically necessary before you dive into Endgame, because not only is it just less grueling, but also it reminds you of what you're fighting for and what this entire conflict is about. And so I thought that having sort of those two movies, Ant-Man and the Wasp and Captain Marvel, in between the final Avengers movies, brilliant touch, and I totally respect it. Thought it was really good. I want to touch on the last thing that I really enjoyed, which is going to segue into what I really didn't like about the movie, and that's casting. Jude Law, fantastic. The woman that plays, I forget her name, Marie Rambeau. She was excellent as well. It's a bit of a shame that Marvel didn't actually lean into that relationship. I mean, it's evidently a same-sex relationship, and it's just a little bit disappointing, a little bit odd that Marvel didn't lean into that and kept on trying to explicitly say, oh, they're best friends. And it's like, well, no, there's clearly much more than that going on, and there's nothing wrong with that, so why don't just lean into that a bit more. But anyway, that actress was great. The casting overall was fantastic, obviously. Ben Mendelsohn, fantastic as Talos. Great to see Coulson back into it. My issue is, and I know this is going to be controversial, my issue is Brie Larson just wasn't the right choice for this movie. More to the point, she's not actually good in this movie. And in fact, Captain Marvel wasn't done well, irrespective of who the casting was. Let me try to explain that, because I know that there's been a lot of controversy over this movie. If you're familiar with comics in kind of a detailed way, if you watch the podcasts and you follow groups on YouTube and you follow people on Twitter and so on, then you'll be aware of this. If you're a normal human being in the normal mainstream world, you won't be aware of this. But Captain Marvel was quite a controversial movie when the trailers came out, when the movies came out. There was a large section of the comic community that sort of railed against it. They review bombed it on the websites like Rotten Tomatoes and things like that, and they basically had massive issues with what they perceived to be a massively pro-feminist agenda to the movie. And they were like, oh, we hate Captain Marvel, we don't understand why this woman's been cast, and they were having a male and female character. It's equality for the sake of, you know, tokenism, which is to an extent an interesting argument to dissect further. They just felt it was like offensive, and it was just all sorts of things. I mean, the term SJW got thrown around a lot. I don't agree with any of that, and I'll try and explain why. But at the same time, I do feel I should reserve the right to say I didn't enjoy this. And first, I'll talk about Brie Larson. I haven't seen her in anything else, so I don't know what her acting is like. But in this, her acting sometimes was good, and sometimes just didn't quite cut it. I don't know if that's because she's not a good actor, or if this is how she was directed to act by the director, but ultimately her characterisation of Carol Danvers is the characterisation of someone who's trying a little bit too hard to try to be cool and try to act tough. And she tries a bit too hard to have the sassy one-liners, or to flick the hair out of her eyes, or to raise the eyebrow dismissively, or just look tough in any particular way, in a way that the other actors don't. Obviously, RDJ smashes it at Tony Stark, Chris Evans smashes it as Captain America, the Hemsworth kills it as Thor, and I'm not just talking about the male actors. I mean, Olsen absolutely kills it as Scarlet Witch. She's very menacing, but in a really accessible way. ScarJo totally destroys it as Black Widow, absolutely fantastic performance thereof. But there's no desperation to try to come across as like a tough Russian ninja. Whereas Brie Larson, it feels like she hasn't fully understood or accepted what this role is. Either that, or she's been directed to try to show some degree of insecurity or lack of confidence of her portrayal. Either way, I don't know what causes it, but I didn't enjoy it, and it kind of made the role fall a little bit flat for me. On top of that, and compounding that, is the fact that I personally, and this is a personal thing, I don't like Captain Marvel. I don't like Captain Marvel as a Marvel character. I don't enjoy the comics of her in him. The only time I've actually ever enjoyed Captain Marvel is when she wasn't actually Captain Marvel. There's a period in the late 90s, early 2000s when Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers rather, rebranded herself as Warbird. And I very much liked her as Warbird. One, because she was just written in quite a different way. She had a much more of a sort of an earthy, Avengers-y sort of focus. But more importantly, she was dealing and battling a substance addiction, a specific alcoholism. And her interaction with Tony Stark, who obviously has battled that demon many times, was really interesting. And the interplay of their relationship was really phenomenal. And essentially the Warbird era of Captain Marvel is her, for me at least, by far the most interesting era of that character, and I would have loved to have seen that in the film. As it is, Captain Marvel was her least interesting era, and so I just wasn't massively interested in that. What I also want to point out now, this is a separate thing, and this is a criticism about Endgame, and I'm going to keep this here because it makes sense to point it out here, and I don't want to weigh down my Endgame review with any kind of criticism, really, because I assume I'm going to love that second time round as well. She's basically a redundant character. And I know that sounds controversial, but if you think about it this way, Captain Marvel only achieves two things in its entirety in the whole of Endgame. One, she rescues Tony Stark, and two, she turns up at the end and destroys Thanos' ship. One, are you telling me the guy that built an Iron Man arc reactor in a cave from a box of scraps couldn't have cobbled together a way home on a planet full of spaceships? I just find that hard to believe. There's no need for her to rescue him. And secondly, the bit where she comes back and she destroys Thanos' ship, admittedly a very cool scene, but why couldn't Scarlet Witch do that? That would have made much more sense. It would have been really fulfilling. As it is, Scarlet Witch hardly got a chance to shine. And in case anyone's sort of like quibbling about her power levels, as far as I can gather, at least from the film rationale, Scarlet Witch is more powerful than Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel got her powers from an engine which got its powers from an Infinity Stone. In this particular case, the Space Gem, the Tesseract. Whereas Scarlet Witch got her powers directly from the Mind Stone, the Scepter. So they both got their powers by proxy. Arguably, Scarlet Witch got her powers one level sooner, or without one more intermediate step. So she's arguably more powerful anyway. And it would have been awesome to have seen her tear down Thanos' ship. So frankly, once you'd have those two things, you're thinking to yourself, well, was there actually any need to have Captain Marvel at all? I mean, yes, it led to a very cool post-credit scene in Infinity War. And yes, it led to a very cool post-credit scene here in Captain Marvel, where she turns up after the pages switches off. But ultimately, it's like either use her properly and have her in the films much more, which I would not have been averse to, or just don't use her at all, rather than randomly clouding the cast with yet another character. Male or female, I don't really care, but just yet another character. It's a difficult one, because I think just having one movie, just having Ant-Man and the Wasp between Infinity War and Endgame wouldn't have been good enough. I think Captain Marvel performed a really important tonal function of taking it back to the 90s, of really lightening things up, of adding some more context and scope to things. And it occurred at the right time between Infinity War and Endgame, but it just wasn't necessary in a functional way, only I guess in a tonal way. I don't know, it's hard to sort of pin down what I don't like about it, but I guess I'll put it this way: if Samuel Jackson wasn't in this movie wouldn't have been fun. Brie Larson wouldn't have been a compelling protagonist. She wouldn't have been able to carry the movie by herself because of the way she acted it. And fundamentally, if she hadn't been in this movie hadn't existed, Endgame, with a couple of very minor tweaks, could have been exactly the same movie. And I think those are my concerns about Captain Marvel. Anyway, listen, I don't want to bag on this movie too much. It was an enjoyable movie. If this movie existed completely outside the MCU and none of the other movies had ever happened, this still would have been a absolutely great superhero movie. I really enjoyed it. It was good fun, had loads of great bits. Just in the larger context of things, I guess I've got some question marks. But I don't want to go on for too long, so I'm going to leave it there. Until tomorrow, guys, I'm going to be watching Avengers Endgame, which is the end of my entire watch through. Like I mentioned before, I'm not going to be including Spider-Man Far From Home for various reasons. So, yeah, thanks for watching, guys. As always, please like, comment, subscribe. As always, please head over to Amazon and pick up my pro superhero novel, No Gods or Kings, if you want to support this channel. And as always, until tomorrow when I'm watching Avengers Endgame, let me know your thoughts and stay classy.